Okay, well, firstly, I guess if you want to, I'm going to talk about Sasol essentially, and I'll mostly say the early days till recently. But strictly speaking, I'm not a complete pioneer as far as Sasol goes. Sasol was, on paper, started in 1950 as a company. At that stage, I was still a second-year student at university. And by the time they started rolling with the plant, the early runs, I was still at Bristol University. So I only arrived at Sasol in '59, when they more or less started to look as though they were managing to operate the plants properly. So in that sense, I wasn't there right at the beginning. Incidentally, my eldest brother, one of my older brothers, Len Dry, he joined Sasol 2 years before I did. And at that stage, they decided to establish a research section, which they hadn't done until then. And as the story goes, that one of the American people who started up a plant had advised him not to do catalysis research because it was a black hole. Anyway, Len decided to ignore this, and he invited me to talk me into coming to Sasol. I wasn't all that keen because Sasol really isn't a dump at that stage. And anyway, I came. And having a brother as a boss is not all that good idea, but it worked out. But anyway, coming back to the catalyst development, at that stage they had tremendous problems with the synthol, the circulating fluidized bed reactor. The ore, the iron oxide ore was actually imported from the States, which is an odd thing. It struck one as crazy to import this material, to make a catalyst out of it, and then only to run a couple of weeks with it, 3 or 4 weeks, and then dump it. So catalysis research started that way. So, all right, let's make our own catalyst. And besides which, at that stage too, they didn't quite know about the promoter levels, and I think they cottoned on that there was too much alkali in the ore, or they had added too much alkali, and this depended on the silica content of the alumwood ore, because the silica would vary a little, and that, in hindsight, of course, we found out later on that you should adapt the potassium accordingly. As the silica varied, you should adapt the potassium. And of course, when they added too much potassium, they made too much wax, and the whole reactor sort of seized up and was waxed up, and they had to go and dig it out. And another snag, I think, was the original design of the synthol reactor was, once the reactor was going, the gas was not supposed to be preheated because the hot catalyst from the downcomer would heat up the gas. But this didn't work out, so they eventually had to keep the preheating on permanently to avoid all this wax formation. Anyway, to come back to the catalyst, they had more or less sorted it out, but because of this odd business of having to import the ore, it was decided to have a look at the local ore. In fact, there was a steel mill literally just across the river from Sasolburg, the Iscor Steelworks. And they had tons and tons of what we call mill scale, which is predominantly wustite and magnetite mixture. So we started playing around with this material, cleaned it up, fused it, added alkali at different levels, added these various structural promoters, and in the pilot plants they seemed to work. So the management decided to give it a go, and it worked. So that was our first success in the catalysis field, that we had replaced the imported alumwood ore with a local supply of material, and it worked very well. And after that, of course, we could do all the refining we wanted to on the promoter levels to improve the overall situation. I think in hindsight now, we started off with a methane selectivity around about 15–17%, and currently I think it's running around about 8. So we lowered the methane selectivity, of course, and thereby increased the oil yields and everything. Anyway, that was synthol. Let's see, well, shall I carry on with synthol? So having sorted out the fluidized bed reactor and the catalyst in particular, they built a third reactor, and that also worked well. So the old Sasol 1 plant had 3 fluidized bed reactors. But all along, as a matter of interest, our pilot plants were in fact fixed fluidized bed reactors. And we always were interested in this story because they had been operated at Brownsville, apparently successfully, but there was some rumor that the reactor had given trouble and we weren't sure if it was real or whether it was a catalyst problem or not. So anyway, we started fiddling around with fluidization, and we built quite large plexiglass reactors so that we could see what was happening. And also Badger came in the act, and they provided us with their special fluid distributor orifices. And we tried them out, and they seemed to be good. And then eventually we encouraged management to seriously think of fixed fluidized bed reactors. And fortunately they accepted our recommendation and they built a demonstration plant. And this demo plant was really important in the sense that once we had this demo plant, and I'm jumping the gun now, it also led to the slurry phase reactor because we had the demo plant. And anyway, we played around with the fixed fluidized bed reactor, using the same catalyst essentially, and simply taking the gas straight off the plant. The demo plant was actually in the plant itself, and it worked well. But that came after Cecil 2 and 3 were built. So the Cecil 2 and 3 still had the big circulating fluidized bed reactors. They were scaled up. The capacity of the Secunda fluidized bed reactors, the circulating fluidized bed reactors, was threefold that of the old Cecil 1 reactors. And going back a bit, in our pilot plant studies, we also had found that if you increase the pressure and kept the linear velocity the same, in other words, you increase the throughput of the reactor, the percent conversion stayed the same. This was obvious from the kinetics of the system. But also, interestingly enough, as you increase the pressure, despite the higher partial pressure of CO, the carbon deposition rate decreased. Now, I don't believe that carbon deposition as such is a poison. A lot of people say it is. But if you look at a synthol catalyst running for several weeks, it has in fact got more carbon than iron on it, and it operates fairly well. The snag about carbon deposition is catalysts break up and subsequent loss of fines out of the cyclones. And also the alkali promoter is enriched in the fines so that you lose alkali and you lose the high carbide portion of the catalyst, and this is really, in my opinion, the real reason for the decline in activity with time on stream. It's more mechanical thing. Okay, now this is also what I'm getting at is because of the higher pressure, you could in fact operate higher throughput and making less carbon. And the Secunda reactors there was a slight increase in pressure, from about 20 atmospheres up to about 25, 26. And when it came to designing the Moss gas reactors, which is the other plant in Mossel Bay, we actually recommended high pressure reactors, about 45 bar, but that was eventually decided against, and it's a pity because I'm sure the high pressure would have worked well, but the reasoning was that for their capacity, they only would have needed 2 reactors. And if one brought down, that only means you lost 50% of the plant's capacity. So they stuck to 3 reactors that's around about 26 bar atmosphere. So once again, we didn't score on the high pressure work. But it's still a potential in my opinion. But the snag, of course, with high pressure is you need a high pressure syngas supply. Because I gather that compressing gas is a pretty expensive operation. Anyway, I think that deals with synthol. After that, we developed the fixed fluidized bed, and once the demonstration unit showed that it worked, the large reactor was built, which ran at Cecil 1. It's a commercial operation, that was a success. And then followed, we go straight on to the slurry, because we had the demo unit, and we had fiddled around with slurry in the pilot plant, but of course there was no way of knowing that we were going to work on a bigger scale. We immediately simply changed the demo unit to a slurry phase reactor. And that worked well. And when at that stage Cecil decided to stop producing the fluidized bed operations at Cecil 1, And so the commercial fixed fluidized bed was converted to a slurry bed reactor. So what I'm getting at is, we started in the pilot plant as a fixed fluidized bed. We went to a demo unit for the high temperature fixed fluidized bed. That demo unit was used to develop the slurry unit, and the commercial fixed fluidized bed was then also converted to a slurry unit. So there's a whole long history of where fluidization led us to, not only to the high temperature, but to the low temperature process. Okay, I think that's about brings us up to date as far as the fluidization system is concerned. Is this okay?
Well, was it primarily the catalyst or the reactor design or both?
Both. I think once we sorted out the catalyst in the middle 60s, there wasn't much further improvement. You know, you fiddle a bit with the alkali level to tweak up the oil production a little, but you can't go too far, because as soon as you put a little too much alkali on, you start waxing up the catalyst, and that causes defluidization. So there's a sort of upper limit there. Most of the work was done on pressure studies, and of course, I mean, even the high pressure, remember, the higher pressure work would make less carbon, and because the carbon is an excellent soak for the wax, it's a high area stuff, you also produce less wax simultaneously, or less wax remained on the catalyst, so there was less danger of agglomeration. So in general, I still push high pressure, but it's a matter of economics.
Well, when you joined, what was the stories about the initial problems and starting up the circulating?
Oh, okay. As I say, I think they were operating at they were not using the recycled gas was not being preheated, because the theory was that you didn't need to preheat the gas, because the gas would be preheated by the hot catalyst flowing down the standpipe, and that meant in the so-called riser section of the catalyst, the temperatures were lower than they should be, and this caused wax formation. So you got a lot of catalyst laid down on the walls of the reactor, and that was a problem.
Well, was this a carryover from the fluid catalytic cracking, where you regenerate the catalyst and get it hot? Or?
Yes, I suppose so. The idea was that the hot catalyst down the standpipe there was enough energy in the hot catalyst to heat up the gas. But it was a combination of not sufficient preheat plus too high alkali level. So they introduced kept the preheat going and lowered the alkali level, and then the thing performed okay. But you see, at that early stage, they didn't appreciate the alkalinity aspect, what I call the basicity of the catalyst surface. They simply were adding fixed amounts of alkali, as had been originally determined by the test in the States. But because the silica was varying in the aluminum ore, which is a magnetite ore, they should have adjusted the alkali, which they weren't aware of the fact. And that's where our basic research came in. We indicated that the basicity of the catalyst was not only dependent on the K2O level, but also on the silica content.
Now, where was the work in the U.S. done, at Kellogg? Or?
Yes, I'm not quite sure. What's that place? I visited them at one stage. I forget the name now. Kellogg, it was called Kellogg Reactors originally, and they changed the name to Synthol later on, because of all the mechanical changes and improvements. No, it's hydrocarbon.
HRI?
I think the catalyst was developed there originally.
Was there any interaction of Sasol people with HRI people that were at Brownsville, or?
You know, that I'm not aware of. I'm not aware of a direct contact. We just sort of heard rumors about Brownsville. And it might be that someone had contacted them in the early days. I really don't know. Certainly at the research department, we had no inside information on the Brownsville performances. Just rumors we heard.
Did Kellogg have a lot of people on site during the early?
They must have in the early days, yes. I think by the time I arrived, there were only a few startup engineers around. But they disappeared quite soon as we sorted out the fluidization problems and the alkalinity levels.
Did they ever try regeneration in the catalyst holding side of circulating?
No, Now, what we did do in the pilot plant studies is to see if the catalyst is regenerable, and certainly it is. But there were two aspects. When you simply burnt off the carbon and the waxes and ended up with the oxide, because of the high carbon content of the catalyst, which sort of split, if you wish, distributes the iron oxides and carbides within the carbon matrix, you end up with extremely fine material. So you certainly had to refuse it in any event. You couldn't just recharge that to the reactor. In the pilot plants it worked fine, but our pilot plants had filtered, the filters were sintered metal filters, so the catalyst couldn't escape.
Mm-hmm.
But in the commercial plant, all those fines would have flown out of the reactor. So it wasn't a proposition to simply burn off the carbon and recharge it, and you would have to refuse it. And because the mill scale was so dirt cheap, the stuff we ended up with, it simply was not worth it. It's just not uneconomical to regenerate. It might be now, but certainly then, and as far as I know, they still just use mill scale and throw it away.
Now, why does the alkali concentrate in the fines?
Why does it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, for a start, and this has been published, so there's no secrets. If you look at, say, a good scanning electron microscope of the catalyst fine, the ground-reduced catalyst, you in fact can see loose alkali material, finely ground loose alkali. Some of the alkali is still embedded within the iron matrix. I presume the iron does creep over the catalyst. This has been demonstrated, even the ammonia synthesis type work. But nevertheless, there are little lumps of potassium silicate. Now, these small particles of potassium silicate, which you can see as a source of potassium, are very fine, and they are light. So that as you lose fines, you lose some of your alkali-enriched material as well. And besides that, because the active phase is presumably the carbide ion phase, not the oxide. And because the fines are carbide rich, it's once again just a matter of, as I see it, the big particle, you get reaction on the surface, the hydrogen-water ratio inside in the middle of the particle, remember these are highly porous particles, would oxidize because the water vapor hydrogen ratio is such. So, and this doesn't happen in the fines, because the entire particle remains carbidic. And so, and this is the fines, not only alkali rich, but they are richer in carbide. So they are the more active portion of the catalyst. And as you lose them, you simply lose activity in the catalyst. Furthermore, this is a snag of the circulating system. As you produce carbon, the bulk density of the catalyst decreases, right? Mm-hmm. Now, to operate a synthol reactor decently, you must always ensure that the differential pressure over the standpipe is higher than the differential pressure over what I call the reactor loop side. But now, as you build up carbon, the standpipe height doesn't change much. As you deposit carbon, the bulk density goes down, so the differential pressure over the standpipe decreases. That means, whereas normally you would want to increase the loading of catalyst as the catalyst deactivates, you can't, because the differential pressure doesn't allow it. So in fact, the loading in the reactor zone decreases. That adds to in my opinion, it adds to the rate of decline. Not only are you losing active catalyst, but you are loading less catalyst in the reactor side. That's an argument, right? So that now this is the advantage, coming back to the fixed fluidized bed, doesn't have this problem. There is no loop in the reactor. In fact, if you deposit some carbon, so what? The bed expands, and if anything, the contact time becomes longer, I guess. Anyway, whatever the reason is, the rate of decline in the fixed fluidized bed is lower. For start, it's a lower linear velocity, so you're not throwing out fines so rapidly, and the slight bed expansion is not a major problem. The bulk density isn't so critical. So that in that sense, the fixed fluidized bed, you use less catalyst, it has a high throughput, And of course, it's a much cheaper reactor to build. So that the fixed fluidized bed has been a great success financially. Well, as you know, Burt, yourself, you've seen the reactors, Secunda. They're now 10 meters. So we started off with a 2-inch pilot plant, went to something about 90 centimeters demonstration unit, I think then to a 5 meter, and then Secunda they built 8 and 10 meter units. And they've all been highly successful.
Now, when they were considering moss gas, today they talk about the big economy of scale.
Yes.
But why did they then go for the option of 3 reactors, assuming there would be downtime? Is there more downtime circulating?
Now go back, as far as the fixed fluidized bed goes, that hadn't been fully developed and fully proven. So I think just for a matter of precaution, or what's the designers, you sell a plant, you want to make sure that plant's going to work. So they didn't want to sell moss gas, the fixed fluidized bed, so they sold them the circulating fluidized bed. But as I say, we did try and talk them into a high pressure unit, but once again, they were overcautious and said rather go for 3 reactors and stick to the known pressures, and then as you change reactors, you could, you'd only lose, say, 1/3 of your production instead of half. They were overcautious, in my opinion. As it turns out, to my knowledge, the moss gas plant being methane-based, there's not so much methane. After reforming the methane level in the feed gas is much lower than the methane level in the feed gas on a coal-based plant. So effectively the partial pressures of hydrogen and CO are higher at moss gas. And once again, because the carbon deposition is inversely proportional to the partial pressure of hydrogen. Well, in fact, the thing that we concocted from pilot plant studies is the rate of carbon deposition is proportional to the partial pressure of CO divided by the partial pressure of hydrogen squared. So even though the total pressure went up, that factor of CO divided by hydrogen squared went down. So when the moss gas feed is in fact has a more favorable ratio as far as carbon deposition goes. So they could do longer runs. I mean, they could have taken the chance and put up fixed fluidized bed, maybe just one of them. But probably, I don't think they would risk one, probably 2. But okay, that's history. Whether they'll change now, every now and then they talk about it, but I don't know if they will change to moss gas. Economics are much more dicey than Sassel's, because they came on stream when the price of oil was low.
Now, what was the basis for starting to work on the slurry reactor?
Why we started at all?
Yes.
Well, in research we just did these things. I guess people were talking about slurry all along. And our first tests and still I maintain that the slurry reactor, remember our first tests were done in 2-inch reactors. And there wasn't much difference in activity. But what really sold the thing was the fact that the engineers had calculated that building a reactor would be so much cheaper. And that was really the driving force. I don't think the slurry, as far as the product quality is concerned, and the actual synthesis performance, wax production and conversion, there isn't really much in it. Some would say the slurry is better, but in my opinion, it's much of a muchness.
Better than fixed beds?
Yes. I mean, the fixed beds are still operating. They're obviously quite satisfactory. The conversions are very similar. And the wax quality, if anything, the fixed bed might have a slight edge. But in general, they're pretty similar. I think the big difference is simply the cost of the reactor. And so, of course, you use less catalyst. I mean, and another major advantage, as it's been repeatedly said, with a slurry bed reactor, you can keep online. I mean, you can take catalyst out and recharge fresh catalyst. You keep going for, I think Sassel has said, over a year before you come down, not for reasons of catalyst performance, but You know, the engineers like to make sure everything's still hunky-dory inside the reactor. Maintenance, they must have a maintenance inspection every so often. Whereas with a fixed bed, as you know, you run for a couple of months, and then you decide the wax production is not what you want, so you've got to charge a new catalyst, and that means a turnaround. And of course, in terms of massive catalysts, there's a lot more. Fixed bed, you charge more catalyst. And of course, you lose a couple of days every turnaround, so you lose in production. So really, it was the online time and the cheapness of the reactor study is a very obvious thing. And from I come back from the chemistry point of view. If you just look at the catalyst performance and the conversion and the quality of the wax and everything, there's not much in it. It's an economic decision based on the reactor's performance, the cheapness of the reactor, the online time and things like that. So I don't think they'll ever go back to fixed bed. Shell decided to go to fixed bed, I think, simply because, well, once again, at that stage, there was no proof that the slurry reactor was a commercial success. And also they still maintain that, well, and it's true, if the fixed bed reactor, if the catalyst lasts for many years, as the cobalt is supposed to, then I suppose the economics of the reactor are not all that vital. I mean, really, the product is valuable. So you have to spend more money building the reactor, but once you've got it, I suppose the difference in price disappears, if the catalyst lasts a long time. But iron is not so critical. If the catalyst flops, you take it out and put new one in. I mean, especially with the slurry reactor. With cobalt, that will be rather an expensive operation to keep charging new catalyst in. So Shell has very rigidly maintained that they like their fixed bed, but I don't know how much of that is politics.
Well, what are some of the horror stories of starting up the fluid bed reactors?
The high temperature?
Yes.
Well, the worst ones was they had to go out in with jackhammers to get the catalyst out of the reactor. But I've mentioned that with the high wax make, a lot of catalysts lay down. Oh no! Further horror story, of course. But this is, you know about this. The danger of the fluid, the circulating fluidized bed reactor, is that you have to have high linear velocities. And in particular in that bottom loop section, before you get to the wider reactor section, the linear velocities are very high. And iron carbide and oxide are pretty abrasive things. And in fact, at Secunda, they had two major fires because the catalyst chewed straight through the ceramic lining and made a hole in the reactor, and there was a tremendous fire. So that was a horror story, if you want. Simply because there must have been a failure in the lining of the reactor, the ceramic lining. Now coming back, that's another advantage of the fixed fluidized bed. It's a low linear velocity, so there's no danger of chewing through the reactor lining.
But what about the formation of fines? How was that finally solved?
In the high temperature thing?
Carbon? Mm-hmm.
No, well, there's no solution in a sense. Well, what I mean is, you've got to settle for a compromise. Alkalinity you want because you want high oil production, you want low methane, you want high oil. So you push the alkali as high as you can get away with, right? But alkali also enhances carbon formation. I mean, that's well proven. That alkali promotes Fischer-Tropsch, it promotes carbon formation, which is not surprising if you say, well, CO dissociates to CO and oxygen, the C reacts with hydrogen, depends what theory you like, but whatever, if some stage you have to break the carbon-oxygen bond, right? And carbon is a natural byproduct, I think. If you don't hydrogenate, if you take the simple concept that you have elemental carbon on the surface, that carbon can either be hydrogenated to CH2 or what have you, or it can migrate and form graphite. So you have to live with the carbon on iron. And I suppose on cobalt catalyst, the hydrogenation is so much faster than, well, the temperature is much lower. On iron, at high temperature, remember, you don't form carbon in the low temperature iron process. It's only the high temperature where you're forming a carbon. So, your question, how can you avoid fines? Well, that's the problem. With a high temperature process, you push the alkali to its limit as far as the selectivity goes, but then inevitably you're also making more carbon. And the solution, as I can only say, is operate at higher pressure. Then you'll minimize carbon formation, at least lower it, without sacrificing selectivity. The increased pressure does not affect selectivity.
How did Sasol get established as a reactor engineering company?
Just learning the hard way, I guess. I mean, they took these Kellogg reactors, operated them, and found what the snags are, and had to start changing things. They had tremendous problems with the slide valves, for instance, as well, and they improved those. And as I say, it's the ceramic linings and the cooler tubes also. The original Kellogg reactors had what you call the heat exchangers were fixed tubular things, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Water on the outside, and then later on they were replaced by coils, which is much better because you have more free space, and the heat exchange was much better. With the fixed tubular thing, there was erosion of the catalyst too, and that was another early disaster. That even before my time, the catalyst would chew away at the base of the heat exchanger, and then you'd have steam start splitting into the reactor. So that was a mess. So they had to get special ferrules or something at the mouth of each pipe as you went up to prevent erosion. But anyway, all those heat exchangers were replaced by coil heat exchangers.
Now,
so that is the way. It is all mechanical developments.
How did Sasol get people, technical engineering people, to work on the plant? Initially, was this recruiting outside of the country or training inside?
Even when I arrived, there was still a lot of Germans, a lot of Dutch around. Quite a few of the Germans had Fischer-Tropsch experience. But of course, the plant, remember there were two plants. We haven't spoken about the fixed bed. You want to talk about that?
Yes.
But there was a lot of Germans operating the fixed bed operations, and the engineers that helped the startup. And the Kellogg people, the Americans, that helped start it up with the synthol fluidized bed reactors. So I guess a lot of the know-how was simply learned from them. And then, as I say, they simply learned the hard way. I mean, in the end, all the people had left, and if there were troubles, Sasol had to solve their own problems. That was the interesting thing about working there. I mean, from the research angle and from the reactor development angle, we were on our own. I mean, there was no one else who was stupid enough to run Fischer-Tropsch. We had to fix them. If there was a problem, it had to be fixed by the people on site. And that made it very challenging, of course, and very interesting. You know, a lot of countries like South Africa, often you have companies that are simply the mother companies, either in Britain or in the USA, and so there's a technical problem, you simply go and ask the mother company. But in our case, we had to help ourselves. I mean, for instance, in Kellogg, I know that when they had decided to build the Secunda reactors, which are larger, and they invited Kellogg to submit a proposal, and Kellogg were not interested because they'd lost all that know-how. So we ended up with Badger designing the Secunda reactors. Of course, all was the input from the technical input from Sasol, but the actual design was in the hands of Badger. And Badger also designed our demonstration units, our fixed bed units.
But Badger hadn't kept up with Fischer-Tropsch either.
No, but they had fluidization experience, okay. Fixed fluidization experience. I think their main contribution was the special distributor design that avoided erosion. I mean, the obvious thing was this erosive catalyst. It would erode the orifice. The design was such that the catalyst didn't get to the orifice. I better not say anything more. I don't know how secret that is anymore, but it was very secret at the time.
What, in your mind, distinguishes Sasol from most companies?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but they were stuck with this problem, you know. The whole Sasol, from the word go, was a mixture of politics and economics. I mean, putting on the glossy side, Sasol 1 was supposed to be an economic venture. There was no oil in the country. There was plenty of cheap coal, so not because we, as people think we didn't pay the miners enough, but because the seams are very shallow and thick seams at a shallow depth. So the mining was just all mechanical, so the coal was cheap. And the forecast was at that stage that the oil reserves were running out, you know. In the early 50s, people thought there's no oil left in the world, and that the price of crude would go up. So someone decided that Fischer-Tropsch should be viable in, say, 10 years hence. If they built a plant in the 50s, it would be viable. But of course, before the plant was even constructed, the massive reserves of Saudi Arabia were discovered, which flattened the economics completely. So Sasol 1, in that sense, was a mess. But having built the plant, I know the opposition in Parliament had a field day. They were blaming the government for this mess of Sasol. And it was quite embarrassing. We knew the plant wasn't making money, except for the fixed bed reactor. That was making good quality wax, which they sold. So that was always the excuse, well, we made some chemicals, which kept us going. But once then that was economics plus thing. But when the mid-70s, when the oil crisis came and that hit the whole world, then it suddenly then it was more political, and also for instance, our crude oil, Sasol also owns a big oil refinery called Natref, and that was jointly owned by, what's this French company? Total, Sasol, and the Iranian oil company. And the Iranians supplied all the oil. But then suddenly, the big revolution, the Ayatollahs took over, and they said no more oil for South Africa. Straight political decision. I mean, we were not very popular in the world anyway, and they cut the oil supplies off. So that's why it was a great incentive to expand the Secunda operation. And as I say, as you know, those two Secunda plants came online when the oil was well over $30 a barrel. So that was a success story. So that time it was politics and the economics matched that time. But going back to the Iranian thing, the funny joke is, after they stopped the oil, you see there was a joint company and the Iranians were supposed to be getting a third of the profits sort of thing. And then after a couple of years they said, where's our money? And Sasol simply said, where's our oil? So I think that's where the story ended. It wasn't pursued by the Iranians after that. They were supposed to supply the oil and they weren't. That is.
Who are some of the people you would single out as pioneers in the early years?
In the Sasol?
Yes.
It's difficult to say. Of course, the Rousseau was the general manager or the managing director. He was given the job of getting the whole thing going. There were people like, from the technical point of view, you mean?
Engineering.
Yeah, there was a chap Stander who was very helpful in helping along research and pushing their results. A chap called Art Stander, he was a chemical engineer. I can't think. Of course, there's my brother Len Dry, who was very optimistic about the research. He was very positive about things, and he sold a lot of the new ideas to the management. I don't know, there were too many people involved. It really was a team effort. I mean, as I say, everyone had to pull in and try and solve the problems. It's difficult to single out any particular people. When later on the top management just became managers, and left all the technical stuff to the people whose business it was. Okay, you want to talk about the argument briefly?
Yeah.
That was much more successful. I say the original German plant the multi-tubular reactor, and they kicked off very well. There was no problems to my knowledge. They always seemed to be making good quality wax. And the only thing that we did there, okay, we did improve the catalyst. And as you know, it's from first principles, it's a pelleted catalyst, so, and you operate at low temperatures and under a trickle bed operation, so the fusion is obviously a problem. So we changed, let me just say, we changed the shape of the catalyst, which made it more accessible, and we improved the conversion quite considerably that way. We also fiddled around a little bit with the alkalinity and so on, improved matters. But basically it was still it was an improved Ruhr-Chemie catalyst, put it that way. Shape and composition, very much, and the slurry reactor is still much, the slurry phase reactor is still much the same. On the subject of course, there's no carbon deposition problem there. We did also look at high pressure operations for the wax used in plants. In fact, our pilot plants, we went up to about 80 bar. And we showed that not only the high temperature process increased with pressure as far as productivity goes, but the same applied for the low temperature process. Of course, it's the same kinetics after all. Okay, the constants might be a bit different, but as you increase partial pressures, the rates of the reaction went up. And of course, the water partial pressure effect was the same, but basically it's the same kinetics. The simple kinetic equation that seemed to describe the high temperature process described the low temperature process equally well. So anyway, what I'm getting at is we also ran the fixed bed reactor at very high pressures and showed that it operated well. And at least there, they did take the high pressure option, and they built a 6 Argy reactor which operated 45 bar, whereas the old reactors operated, I think, 29 bar or something like that. And it reacted fine. It worked very well, the high pressure reactor. But in fact, when they went over to the slurry phase reactor, they shut this high pressure reactor down, not because it wasn't working well, because they had other plans for it. They used it for making methanol. So technically and scientifically, we did succeed in operating this Fischer-Tropsch at 45 bar. But I come back, the snag is still, you need a high pressure syngas to make it even more economic, because otherwise you have to make the syngas and then compress it to a high pressure, and that costs a lot of money. If someone said a big compressor costs as much as the reactor. So. But at least that's one success we had from a technical point of view. We did demonstrate commercially that Fischer-Tropsch could operate at 45 bar. I mean, in the pilot plant, we could surely operate it up to 80 bar. The fixed beds, I think we ran up to about 70 bar on both fixed and fluidized bed. We had these high pressure reactors. For both the high temperature and the low temperature, we demonstrated that there's no reason you can't operate at higher pressures. The selectivities are unchanged. In the case of the high temperature process, of course, you have this bonus of lower carbon deposition. But that, of course, wasn't relevant in the low pressure, because you don't make carbon anyway. So that's about my story. Is enough.